They walked me out on a Wednesday morning, not a Friday, a Wednesday. Like I wasn't even worth the courtesy of end-of-week timing. I had my coffee thermos in one hand and my laptop bag in the other when my new COO, a guy named Clifton, called me into the conference room on the third floor. The one with the big windows overlooking the parking lot. I'd sat in that room 1,000 times. My mother used to hold her quarterly reviews in there. She'd always kept a small cactus on the windowsill because she said it reminded her that tough things survive. The cactus was gone. Clifton had replaced it with a Bluetooth speaker. He didn't stand up when I walked in. Didn't even put down his phone. He just slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward me and said, "Lorraine, we're eliminating your position. Security will escort you out once you've collected your personal items. This is effective immediately." Just like that. 23 years. My name is Lorraine Ashby. I'm 54 years old. My mother, Vivian Ashby, started this company, Ashby Textile Solutions, in 1987 out of a leased warehouse in Columbus, Ohio, with 11 employees and one client. By the time she passed 6 years ago, we had 4 facilities, 230 employees, and contracts with some of the largest hotel chains and hospital networks in the Midwest. She left me 78% of the company through a revocable living trust. Clifton had been in his position for 5 months. He did not know about the trust. Almost no one did, and that was by design. My mother built this company the old way. You don't flash what you have, you protect it. When she transferred ownership to me, our estate attorney, a man named Wallace Pruitt, who had been with our family for 30 years, structured everything so that the trust held the shares. Not me personally. On paper, at a casual glance, I looked like a senior operations manager who'd been around a long time. Nothing more. My mother told me once, right before she got sick, "Lorraine, the moment people know what you own, they stop seeing you and start seeing what they can take." I didn't fully understand it then. I do now. Clifton was brought in by our outside investor group, a private equity firm out of Chicago called Meridian Capital Partners that held the remaining 22%. They'd been pushing for operational modernization for 2 years. When our previous CEO retired, the board, which at that time I was not actively sitting on, again by design, voted to bring in external leadership. I let it happen. I told myself I was giving the process a chance. I told myself I was being patient. I should have paid more attention to who they were about to hand my mother's company to. Clifton Marsh came in from a logistics company in Atlanta, where he'd spent 4 years as a VP. His LinkedIn was impressive. His first board presentation was polished. He talked about right-sizing the workforce and technology-first operations and eliminating legacy inefficiencies. He used the word ecosystem 11 times in one meeting. I counted. What he actually meant was, he was going to cut costs fast, make the numbers look good for 12 months, and position the company for a sale that Meridian had apparently already begun quietly exploring. I didn't know that last part yet. I would find out later. What I did know almost immediately was that something was wrong. In his second month, Clifton laid off our head of quality control, a woman named Patricia, who had been with us for 19 years. Patricia knew our production standards better than any person alive except maybe me. He replaced her role with a third-party vendor audit system that checked boxes on paper and caught nothing in practice. I raised it in a staff meeting. Clifton smiled and said the decision had already been made. In his third month, he restructured our customer service team from 12 people to 4 and moved to an automated chat system for client inquiries. We started getting calls from our hospital network contacts, actual phone calls from procurement managers who were frustrated they couldn't reach a human being. I forwarded those concerns to Clifton in writing. He replied with a single line, "Noted." Trust the process. In his 4th month, he renegotiated 3 of our supplier contracts unilaterally, breaking relationships we've maintained for over a decade, to save 4% on raw material costs. 2 of those suppliers had given us priority allocation during the COVID supply chain disruptions. They wouldn't forget. I knew they wouldn't forget. I documented everything, every email, every decision, every metric that started sliding. I kept a running document on a personal laptop. not a company device. And I updated it every single week. I did not tell anyone what I was doing, not even my daughter, Ren, who also works in the company's finance department and who had been quietly furious about Clifton since month 2. Ren would stop by my desk sometimes and just look at me with this expression. You know that look your kids give you when they think you're letting something bad happen and they can't understand why you're not stopping it. She never said it outright, but I could feel it. Mom, she said one evening in the parking garage, just the two of us. How long are we going to watch this? As long as I need to, I said. He's dismantling everything Grandma built. I know. Then why? Because if I move too soon, he walks away clean. I need it to be airtight. She didn't say anything else. She trusted me. That trust was not easy to hold. Here's what most people don't understand about a situation like mine. Walking in and invoking majority ownership on day one is easy. What's hard is making sure that when you do it, it sticks. Permanently, legally, undeniably. Clifton had been hired through a board process. He had an employment contract. He had protections. If I had moved against him in month 1, based on strategic disagreements, his lawyers would have had a field day. I needed documented pattern. I needed financial evidence. I needed it to be so clear that there was no ambiguity, no counter-argument, no room for a wrongful termination claim or a shareholder dispute from Meridian. Wallace had advised me on this from the beginning. The first call I made after Clifton's appointment was to Wallace. He said, "Let him show you who he is. Document everything. When you're ready, we'll move quickly." So I waited, and I watched, and I went to work every day in my mother's building, managing operations, keeping things from falling apart worse than they already were, while a man who didn't know my name was on the trust document, made decisions that were slowly bleeding the company she built from nothing. Until the Wednesday he handed me that piece of paper. I read it once, put it flat on the table, looked at Clifton, who was already typing something on his phone again, and said, "I'll need the standard documentation for my files." He looked up. "HR will send it." "Thank you," I said, and I stood up, picked up my coffee thermos, and walked out. Security was a 22-year-old kid named whoever he was who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. He walked with me to my office. I took my personal photographs, one of my mother at the original warehouse, one of Ren at her college graduation, and my personal laptop. I left everything else exactly where it was. I did not make a scene. I did not raise my voice. I walked to my car in the parking lot. The moment I sat down in a driver's seat, I called Wallace. He picked up on the second ring. "He fired me this morning," I said. A pause. Then, "All right, are you ready?" "Yes. I'll contact the board secretary today to notice an emergency shareholder meeting. As majority interest holder under the trust, you have the right to call one without going through the CEO. 72 hours. Do it. Lorraine, do you want me to reach out to Meridian first? Give them a heads up." I thought about it for about 4 seconds. "No. I want them in the room." "Okay," Wallace said, "then let's go." I drove home. Made myself lunch, a turkey sandwich on wheat bread, which is what I always make when I need to think clearly. Don't ask me why, it's just always been true. Sat at my kitchen table, opened my personal laptop, and spent the next 6 hours organizing 23 years of institutional knowledge, 4 months of documented evidence, and the clearest financial deterioration analysis I had ever put together in my life. I slept fine that night. People always expect me to say I didn't. I slept fine. The emergency shareholder meeting was called for that Friday. Wallace sent formal notice to the board members and to Meridian's managing director, a man named Garrett Hollis, on Wednesday afternoon, about 4 hours after I left the building. I know because Ren texted me at 4:37 p.m. "Mom, there is chaos in this building right now. What did you do?" I sent her back a single emoji, the small flame one. She called me 30 seconds later. "Are you serious?" "Friday," I said. "Can you be there?" "Wild horses," she said. The meeting was held in the same third-floor conference room. The one with the windows overlooking the parking lot. The Bluetooth speaker was still on the windowsill where my mother's cactus used to be. I noticed that when I walked in. I made a mental note to bring a new cactus next week. Clifton was already seated when I arrived. He looked surprised to see me. Not alarmed. Surprised. The way you're surprised when something mildly inconvenient happens, like a flight delay. He leaned over to the woman next to him, his executive assistant, and said something quietly, and she looked at me and then looked away. Garrett Hollis from Meridian was there with two of his people. Garrett was in his late 40s, very good suit. The kind of man who projects calm because he's been in rooms like this before, and he believes he always knows how they end. He did not know how this one was going to end. Wallace was beside me. Our outside corporate counsel, a firm we've used for 20 years, had two attorneys at the table as well. I had brought a bound presentation, printed, tabbed, one copy per person in the room. Ren sat against the wall on the side, not at the table, just present. She dressed up. I noticed that. She'd worn the blazer she bought for her grandmother's memorial service. Wallace opened the meeting by establishing quorum and then introduced me, formally, with my full legal designation under the trust document. He placed a copy of the trust on the table in front of each board member. He read the relevant section aloud. The one establishing me as controlling member with 78% beneficial interest. The one outlining my rights as majority holder. And a clause, the one I'd discussed with him for years as purely theoretical, that allowed the majority interest holder to call an emergency session and exercise direct governance authority in the event of demonstrated material harm to the company. Clifton's face went through about 4 different expressions in about 8 seconds. Garrett Hollis, to his credit, kept his composure. He looked at the trust document, looked at his own attorneys. One of them leaned in and said something. Garrett nodded slowly. Then he looked at me and said, Mrs. Ms. Ashby, I wasn't aware of the structure. I know, I said. How long since my mother passed? 6 years. He sat back in his chair. And you chose not to disclose. I chose not to disclose, I said. There's a difference. Clifton finally found his voice. I have an employment contract. You can't just, Mr. Marsh, Wallace said very calmly. Please allow us to complete the presentation. I opened my bound document to the first tab. I walked them through it the way my mother used to walk through hard things, methodically, without emotion, letting the numbers do the talking. Tab 1, month-over-month client satisfaction score since Clifton's arrival, down 31%. Tab 2, employee retention. We'd lost 28 people in 5 months, 12% of our workforce, 11 of them in quality control and customer service. Exit interview data, which HR still sends to a general inbox I had access to, told a consistent story. Tab 3, supplier relationship status. 2 of the 3 renegotiated supplier contracts had already resulted in priority allocation changes that would affect our Q1 delivery capacity. I had written confirmation from both suppliers. Tab 4, financial projections. Our largest hospital network contract, worth $4.2 million annually, had a renewal conversation coming up in 90 days. Based on the service degradation they'd experienced, I had reason to believe renewal was at risk. I had an email, obtained through a contact, that suggested their procurement team was already evaluating alternatives. Tab 5, Meridian's internal communication. This was the one that changed the temperature in the room. Through channels I won't detail here, I had become aware that Meridian had been in preliminary conversations with a competitor, a larger textile manufacturing group based in Tennessee, about a potential acquisition of Ashby Textile Solutions. These conversations had apparently been occurring for at least 2 months. Clifton's operational improvements were, in my assessment, designed not to build the company, but to clean up the balance sheet for a sale. A sale that no one had disclosed to me. A sale of a company that I owned 78% of. Garrett Hollis had gone very still. I said, I want to be clear about something. I am not here today because Clifton fired me. I was inconvenienced by that, not threatened. I'm here because this company employs 230 people, most of whom have been here a long time, most of whom are good at their jobs and deserve to be treated accordingly. And I'm here because someone has apparently been exploring the sale of my mother's company without informing the majority owner. Silence. Clifton said, I don't know anything about a sale. I looked at him. I believe you, I said. And I meant it. I think Clifton was a tool, not an architect. That didn't make what he'd done less damaging, but it was true. I looked at Garrett. Do you have anything to say? Garrett looked at his attorney. His attorney said something quiet. Garrett said, we would want to discuss this privately with our counsel before. That's fine, I said. I want to give you the opportunity to do that. What I will tell you now is what's going to happen today regardless of those discussions. I turned to the board. Effective today, I am invoking majority holder authority under the trust document Wallace has provided. Clifton Marsh's employment as COO is terminated, effective immediately, with cause, based on the documented material harm outlined in the tabs you're looking at. I will be resuming an active governance role. I've already spoken with 3 candidates who can provide interim operational support while we conduct a proper search. I paused. Let it settle. And Patricia, I said, our former head of quality control, she's been contacted. She's agreed to come back if offered her position with back pay for the period she was wrongfully displaced. I'd like the board to ratify that today as well. One of the board members, a man named Holt who'd been on our board since my mother's era and who had looked increasingly uncomfortable for the past 20 minutes, exhaled audibly and said, I'll second that motion right now. Clifton stood up. This is outrageous. I have legal counsel. You're welcome to contact them, Wallace said. We're prepared for that conversation. You fired me this morning, Clifton said, looking at me now like he was trying to find the place where he'd missed something. I fired you this morning. You did, I said, and now I'm firing you. That's how majority ownership works, Mr. Marsh. He left the room. His executive assistant gathered his things and followed. The door closed. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Wren, from her chair against the wall, let out a breath she'd apparently been holding since the meeting started. What happened after that took weeks, not hours. It always does. The Meridian situation required careful legal navigation. They ultimately did not pursue the acquisition conversations further, partly because without Clifton in place their timeline collapsed, and partly because once we documented the extent of the undisclosed discussions, they had significant exposure they didn't want tested. We reached an agreement. I won't share the terms, but I will say that Meridian's stake in this company is now considerably smaller than 22%. Patricia came back 3 weeks later. She walked in on a Monday morning, and the people in the quality control department who were still there stood up and clapped. I happened to be walking through, and I saw it. I had to go into my office and close the door for a minute because I wasn't going to cry in the hallway. But I needed a moment. We brought back 7 of the 11 people from customer service. 4 had already taken other positions and couldn't return immediately, but we stayed in touch and 2 of them are back now in other roles. The hospital network contract renewed. Full value, 3-year term. Their procurement manager sent me a handwritten note, which I have on my desk. There's a new cactus on the windowsill in the 3rd floor conference room. I put it there myself. It's a small barrel cactus in a terracotta pot. Tough, low maintenance, unbothered by difficult conditions. My mother would have liked it. Wren asked me about a month after everything settled, when we were having dinner at her place, whether I'd been scared at any point. Not during the meeting. She knew I wasn't scared then. She meant in those 4 months of waiting. Of watching. I thought about it honestly. Not scared exactly, I said. But there were nights when I wondered if I was making the right call. Watching Patricia get walked out. Watching the team shrink. Telling myself the timing had to be right when people I cared about were being hurt. That wasn't easy. But you held. I held. Why? I mean, what kept you from just calling Wallace and doing it in month 2? I picked up my wine glass. Set it back down. Because your grandmother always said that when you have something worth protecting, you protect it completely. Not halfway. You don't swing until you know you won't miss. I looked at Wren across the table. And because I knew if I moved too soon and he survived it, those same people were going to be in a much worse position than they were. You only get one chance to do it right. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Grandma would have done the same thing. I know, I said. That's what I kept telling myself. The company my mother started in 1987 in a leased warehouse in Columbus, Ohio is still standing. It's still ours. The people who built it with her, the ones who stayed, the ones who came back, are still here. Some things are worth the wait, but only if you spend that time building something they can't argue with. Not anger, not grievance, evidence. My mother taught me that. Clifton Marsh just reminded me why it matters. I keep thinking about that cactus, the one my mother kept on the windowsill in the third-floor conference room for years. Small, unassuming, easy to overlook. Clifton removed it his first week and replaced it with a Bluetooth speaker. I don't think he even registered what he was throwing away. That's the thing about people who move fast without looking carefully. They discard what they don't understand, and they don't slow down long enough to find out what they're missing. What happened to this company didn't happen because Clifton was uniquely evil. He was ambitious and careless, and I think genuinely convinced he was improving things. That's almost worse. The damage that gets done by people who believe they're right is always harder to undo than the damage done by people who know they're wrong. He eliminated Patricia's role not out of malice, but out of impatience. He blew up our supplier relationships not because he wanted to hurt us, but because he was optimizing for a number on a spreadsheet without understanding what lived behind that number. Cause and consequence don't care about intentions. The harm was real either way. I think about what I would have become if I'd let my anger run the timeline. If I'd walked into Wallace's office in month 2, when they walked Patricia out, when I sat across from Wren in that parking garage and saw the look on her face and said, Enoch, end this now, I would have felt righteous, and I might have lost. Not definitely, but possibly. Clifton's lawyers would have had room to argue. Meridian would have had room to maneuver. A rushed move made from emotion is a move made with your eyes half closed. My mother didn't build this company with her eyes half closed. My mother didn't build this company with her eyes half closed. There's a version of intelligence that's just about being smart in a room, knowing the right answer, having the right data. That matters, but it's not enough on its own. The harder thing, the thing I had to practice across 4 of the longest months of my life, was knowing what to do with what I knew and when, sitting on evidence that could have ended something harmful, because the moment wasn't right yet. That discipline is not passive. It costs something real. I paid it in nights where I second-guessed myself, in watching people I cared about take hits I could theoretically have stopped. There's nothing comfortable about that. Anyone who tells you patient strategy feels noble in the moment has never actually practiced it. What kept me steady was the understanding that I had an obligation larger than my own frustration. To the people who'd given decades to what my mother built. To Patricia, who deserved to come back to something still worth coming back to. To Wren, who was watching her mother and deciding what that meant for her own future. When the thing you're protecting is bigger than yourself, it changes the math. It doesn't make it easy. It makes it possible. I put a new cactus on that windowsill the week after the board meeting. Same spot, small barrel cactus in a terracotta pot. Tough, low maintenance, unbothered. The Bluetooth speaker went in the recycling bin. Some things outlast the people who try to replace them. That's not luck. That's what it looks like when someone who built something real made sure it was built to last, and someone who loved her made sure it stayed that way.